Hello, Device Talkers. This is Kayleen Brown of Device Talks, and I am thrilled to bring you another episode of Device Talks AI. On Device Talks AI, we talk about the medical device itself and how artificial intelligence is being integrated into the device for better outcomes. Today's episode is particularly juicy because it's a double hitter. The first part of the episode, I have the opportunity of sitting down with the president and CEO of Asensus Surgical to talk through how Asensus is using artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence for better health outcomes in surgical robotics. My colleague, the very talented Brian Bunce, then will be sitting down with the general manager of Health AI at Amazon Web Services to uncover how that tech giant is supporting the medical device industry. But before we get into the juicy of the episode, for those who are watching on YouTube, you've probably noticed that I'm wearing a fierce purple suit. This is in honor of, in my opinion, the most successful Device Talks conference to date. We just wrapped Device Talks Boston early last month. That was, I'm reflecting again. If you're seeing me on YouTube, you can see that I'm just filled with so much joy and energy. I had the privilege of sitting down with nearly 25 senior medtech leaders over 11 separate sessions. So I was either on stage talking about artificial intelligence, because obviously, or I was behind the camera in the Device Talks recording studio talking to some of the most influential medical device suppliers and supporters of the medical device industry. When I think about the event, outside of having the opportunity of seeing my nearly 2 decades long friendships, I had an opportunity to feel like a person again. I'm laughing when I say that because I have a 1.5-year-old, and this was the first time that I was across the country from him. So I couldn't jump on a plane, a train, a taxi cab, and get home if he needed me. And that was a struggle. I'm not going to lie. It was a milestone for me. The other side of that is I got to be me again. I got to be the medtech millennial. I got to stand on stage with some of the brightest minds in the industry and be completely reinvigorated. It was a really important reminder that I chose the medical device industry because I love it. So thank you, Tom, and thank you for everyone who attended Device Talks Boston. You made it the best yet. So the big news, Karl Storz acquires Asensus Surgical. Could this episode be timed any better? I think not. So this is a perfect opportunity to really understand what was so appealing about Asensus Surgical and why a huge organization like Karl Storz would invest so much into acquiring them. My co-worker, Sean Woolley, has the skinny. I've dropped in the show notes a link to the article that gives you the what. So please take a look. But that leads me beautifully into the first interview, where I have the pleasure of sitting down with Anthony Fernando, the president and CEO of Asensus Surgical. So first off, Anthony and I talk about the difference between augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence. And those are two very big differences. And I highly encourage you to take a listen to help maybe make artificial intelligence a bit more approachable, because it really is about providing more opportunities, not taking opportunities away. We also talk about the Senhance and Luna surgical systems, obviously. And then most exciting for me, we dig into the Intelligent Surgical Unit, which is the world's first real-time augmented intelligence platform available for intraoperative use. We dig in that and more. After my interview with Anthony, my talented colleague Brian Bunce, who's now the editor-in-chief of R&D World and Drug Discovery and Development, sits down with Tahsin Syed, the GM of Health AI at Amazon Web Services. The two of them really discuss Amazon Web Services' mission, and in particular, the need or the desire to help organizations leverage powerful AI capabilities without the need for extensive technical assistance or technical expertise. So before I dig into this juicy episode and finally begin, I did want to circle back to the DeviceTalks recording studio that was on site at DeviceTalks Boston. So at that studio, we recorded along with our editorial director, Tom Salemi, and another talented coworker, Amira Weinecker. We recorded the first suite of DeviceTalk spotlights. We sat down with some of MedTech's best to solve some of the problems in MedTech, as many as we could get to in 2 days. I personally had the opportunity of sitting down with Chad Rohr of Advanced Sterilization Products, Matthew Heidecker of PSN Labs, and Cassie Hoppers of Vantage Medical. I dropped that link in the show notes, so please take a look. If you have a particular problem as you are making your device, there perhaps is a solution there. And we'll be continuing to build that library, so do check in at least weekly and you'll see new content. But that was an absolute thrill. I got to be behind the camera, which is one of my favorite places to be. And I wanted to remind you that DeviceTalks AI, though one of my favorite podcasts, is one of many. So the DeviceTalks Podcast Network is home to MedTech podcasts. We have 10, and here's some exciting news. We're launching 3 new podcasts, one in July, one in August, and one in September. They say time flies when you're having fun. How is it already Christmas? With that, if you're interested in structural heart, stroke, or clinical trials, make sure to subscribe to DeviceTalks on every major podcast platform and on YouTube. That's the only way you're going to get access to those new podcasts when they come out, as well as access to the entire DeviceTalks podcast network. We have new episodes of Stryker Talks and Abbott Talks coming out. And of course, our weekly podcast, DeviceTalks Weekly, with the incredible one and only Tom Salemi. Okay, enough about all of the exciting DeviceTalks happenings. Let's dig in to our first interview. Anthony Fernando, President and CEO of Asensus Surgical. Take it away. Anthony Fernando, President and CEO of Asensus Surgical. Welcome. So pleased to have you here today. And I am teeming with questions. But before we get into my question after question after question, can you give us a 40,000-foot view of Asensus Surgical, perhaps your Senhance, your Luna Surgical robotics platform, just giving us context before we dive into augmented intelligence?
Sure, Kaylin. Hey, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So really quick, Asensus Surgical is a digital surgery technology company. And we are really focused on digitizing the interface between the surgeon and the patient in order to drive predictable and improved outcomes for the patient, and also with some benefits for the surgeons. Like you said, Senhance and Luna, they are robotic platforms. So we leverage robotic manipulation, software algorithms that has AI and machine learning and data analytics combined to deliver this digital surgery that we also call performance guided surgery. So that's in a nutshell, that's who we are and what we strive to do.
Excellent. So before we dig into how augmented intelligence is enhancing the performance, I want to go back to kind of the inception of Asensus Surgical. Was the idea of using artificial/augmented intelligence, and I say it like that because I know we're going to differentiate that here shortly, but was that always an idea in mind to help guide the technology, or did that come later?
I think it was maybe a little bit of both, because I think we kind of tend to overuse the word, the abbreviation AI and artificial quite a lot. But in reality, when you think about surgery, it's a pretty high stakes area where you really have to have a lot of knowledge and experience, because you're dealing with the human life, and that's very, very critical. So that's the reason why we tend to use the term augmented intelligence, because we are trying to provide the surgeon with a level of augmentation, so the surgeon has better knowledge, a higher level of experience, and even give the surgeon a level of higher confidence in order to perform, versus trying to dictate to the surgeon about what should be done, or even for the surgeon to be hands off where a machine kind of takes over. That's not the intent here. So for us, augmented intelligence is really about how can we augment the surgeon so that the surgeon can perform at the highest possible level, irrelevant of their level of training or number of hours or years of experience. They can deliver the best possible outcome for their patients every single time.
So then would you say that augmented intelligence is kind of a companion maybe to the surgeon's practice? I think you had mentioned before, less about kind of directing it, but more of a complement?
I think so, because I think, when you think about a surgeon, the surgeon can't perform his or her duties by themselves. They have a team, right? It's a surgical team with several people in the operating room, surgical assistants and nurses who help the surgeon perform this surgery. So you could think about augmented intelligence being a digital assistant to the surgeon, so that it's always there, and it is the same level of support that the surgeon is getting. It's consistent. Some of the experienced surgeons and surgical teams, they are so synonymous. The assistant and the surgeon, they really can predict what's coming next, and complement each other very well. And what happens when that assistant goes on vacation? Now the surgeon has to get used to working with somebody else, and that's kind of when things don't go as well in the operating room. Things could take longer. Now here, with the augmentation of the surgical procedure with a digital assistant, now you have a level of consistency every day, irrelevant of what the patient is and irrelevant of who the assistant is supporting the case. The assistant, don't get me wrong, the assistant plays a very significant role and will continue to play a significant role. But this kind of normalizes the two sides of the surgeon and the surgical staff, and kind of engage them into the act of surgery as one team, instead of discrete individuals performing the surgical task. And that's really the power of the technology.
Well, this way of thinking about augmented intelligence feels a lot more approachable. One of the lessons that my co-host Brian Bunce and I have really learned over our time with AI Meets Life Size, there is this barrier to adopting, and I'm using the overused generalized term artificial intelligence to make my point. There's this barrier and this sort of resistance, and I say this generally, this resistance to adopting it, but using a softer form of it, augmented intelligence, and thinking about it as a digital assistant. And again, it's not replacing anyone. It's not replacing that important position, but it's producing a more, not reliable, a more consistent support. That feels like, who wouldn't want that? What surgeon, what care worker wouldn't want consistent support that they can rely on as they move forward for better patient outcomes? I'm going to be peppering that in. So I have heard, Anthony, augmented intelligence used more often. In fact, I had done an interview with Ben Newton's GE Healthcare. He's the GM of oncology over there, and he uses augmented intelligence a lot. Is this terminology something that had come in maybe in the last couple of years to help differentiate the differences between artificial intelligence, or has that always been around and we just weren't aware of it?
I think the term has been around for quite some time, but I think it's becoming more and more obvious, especially in the healthcare setting, where the stakes are high, like I stated before. So the word artificial doesn't quite get a lot of traction given the risk profile of surgery. So as a result, I think the augmentation or augmented intelligence tend to be more relevant in the healthcare surgery space, thus kind of becoming more and more prevalent. Like you said, it's definitely something. If I were to go back, 4 or 5 years when we started our digital surgery journey, we started talking about augmented intelligence because that was a conscious decision. And this was the point that you're bringing up is something I had to explain every single time, saying, "Oh, you mean AI?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's the same abbreviation, but I'm talking about something different." And then that took a while. But now when I hear about this topic from other companies, they do tend to use the augmented intelligence phrase more often. So I think it's found its place in surgery.
I have to agree with that. Again, I'm seeing it now more and more and more. So let's shift a little bit and talk specifically about the Intelligent Surgical Units, or the ISU. Can you give us an overview of really what that is and how that works within your existing product line?
Sure. I mean, that's really the brains behind the real-time context that we provide to the surgeon. It's a significantly high-powered computer with a real-time graphics engine that's able to see the surgery while the surgery is happening through the endoscopic video, and it processes that image in less than one frame, so 1/30th of a second. It will process that image, and it gleans a ton of insights from that image to be able to identify certain tissue, instruments, the state of the surgery, which stage is the surgery at, in order to be able to provide the surgeon some suggestions, recommendations, and also offer tools. So it's a real-time image processing engine that can interact with the surgeon and provide feedback, and also provide some tools. For example, if the surgeon wants to measure a certain part of the anatomy and be able to take out a certain margin, let's say a 3 centimeter margin, it's just a flip of a button, a click of a button on the interface, and now the surgeon can measure in real time in 3D space and can get this data in real time. So that's also part of this image processing and machine learning algorithms that deliver these kinds of digital tools. And also, if you think about what the ISU can do, is we have a large database of surgery that we observed over the years, and we've identified best practices and what good looks like in a specific procedure. Now, this has been fed back into this ISU. So it has a deep knowledge of tens of thousands of good surgeries as defined by surgeons. Now, that can be offered to the surgeon in real time to say, I've seen this is what good looks like. Do you want to follow this pathway? So that's what the ISU does. It's just a real-time image processing, image analytics, machine learning device that offers insights to the surgeon.
So we were talking about your intelligent surgical unit and how it really complements your system and how it can complement the surgeon as well as the rest of the care team. What would what has the regulatory pathway looked like for that? Because I know that's very intimidating. Is like, how do you build medical devices, robotic systems in particular, and how do you take it through the FDA pathway? And I know that you had gotten an FDA clearance in, I think it was September of 2021. So maybe you can take us there and kind of walk us through whatever you're comfortable sharing with our audience.
Sure, Kellen. I think for us there are two parts to it, right? We originally started with the robotic platform, and then we added the ISU onto the robotic platform. And the robotic platform initially got approved in 2017, and we leveraged European clinical data in order to demonstrate the product's feasibility. And then fast forward to 2020 is when we received the approval for the ISU. And we believe it is the first real-time machine vision AI device that got approved for surgery. So that took some effort because it was something unique, something new for us, and also even talking with the FDA and some of the European agencies, we tried to understand what they are going to look for. And then we provided those proof points and testing and data in order to demonstrate that. So since then, we've had multiple iterations and different software versions and additional features, etc., that we've added to the platform. And it's kind of, I think there's a relative learning curve on both sides. We are also learning from the agency about what they'd like to see more of, because as you know, things like cybersecurity is becoming an increasing prevalent issue for everybody. So that standards is changing, and we kind of need to keep up. And then at the same time, we are also sharing what we are seeing and hearing from the technology front with the FDA. So I think with the FDA, we have a very collaborative relationship, and we've had that for many years. And that's kind of the pathway. So we are focusing on a traditional 510K pathway continuously for the robotic platform and for the ISU and for the combined device. It is a traditional 510K pathway. We have 510K for the Senhance platform and the ISU, and in the future with the Luna platform, we are going to follow that same pathway because we become our own predicate device.
So, one, thank you for walking us through that history. It's really important to understand what has been done. So you had mentioned kind of your first step into the pathway was in 2017. I mean, how did you consult with other organizations that really understood augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence to help craft what that would look like? I mean, it just seems like in 2017, there wasn't really any even vocabulary around it. And again, I'm coming from a very different perspective. So how did you know how to move forward, and how did you choose 510K as the pathway?
Yeah, I mean, it was in discussion with the agency. We talked to them about what we were planning to do, and then we also had several data points of not so much of medical device, but other regulated products that leverage machine learning and machine vision to provide as a feature. So we looked at those, we talked about them, and then that's kind of how we agreed on a path forward. But we did look at reference devices that exist, mostly on the diagnostic side. Imaging uses some of these augmented intelligence tools. So we looked at the entire ecosystem and found certain parallels and brought them along with our regulatory submission in order to make the case for why this is not that different compared to what already exists.
That's really helpful. Thank you for being so candid. I mean, I feel like it's the more you know, the more you can do with that information, and the more we can move forward together. So I want to circle back a little bit more about the surgical robotic systems and how ISU is being used to help with the, I guess, the AI powered vision capabilities. This is one of the phrases that I had heard you say a little bit before. So how does that system manage the different complexities, like tissue movement, for example, and maybe like haptic feedback? I know those are kind of two different topics. So one, like in the body, in the patient, and the other, the surgeon's interaction. Like, how does that assist and overlay?
So I think that there are somewhat two different things. I think haptic feedback and the AI part, they are two different subsystems. But when you talk about augmented intelligence and camera control, for example, traditionally without a robot, you would ask your assistant, the surgeon would ask the assistant to move the camera, and the assistant would physically move the camera. With a robot, now the surgeon has the ability to stop moving the instruments and then focus and move the camera and then come back to the instruments. With the ISU, what that does is it can see and identify the instruments. So the surgeon can kind of say, okay, I want to go to follow me mode or like autopilot mode. And now what the camera does is the camera will follow wherever you move the instruments. So wherever the surgeon moves the instruments, the camera will follow along. So that way it's one less thing that the surgeon has to do, physically think about. The goal of all of this in augmented intelligence is to reduce the cognitive fatigue of the surgeon, so that the surgeon has the bandwidth to focus on the critical task of caring for the patient and leveraging the surgeon's years and years of experience to deliver the best care and not have to think about all the background tasks that are happening. So that's what the ISU does, is it takes care of that, saying, okay, camera control, we have that under control. Surgeon, you move the instruments to wherever you want and the camera will follow. And you can see what you are looking to see, because that's where you are at any given point of view. So that's more on the camera front. And then I talked about measurement before. And another feature that's coming up in the near future is being able to identify certain anatomy. So if you identify the cystic duct or the liver or any kind of anatomy, and the surgeon says, oh, this is a critical structure, I don't want to kind of make any mistakes or errors, you can put a margin around it and you can set that as a no-fly zone. So now when the surgeon's operating, even by accident, you will not violate that boundary. So the surgeon has the peace of mind to say, okay, I'm in a safe space. I know I'm not going to hit anything by accident, because these things happen. It's a pretty high, fast-paced, high-stress environment. And the goal, again, is for us to give the surgeon the peace of mind to say, I have the boundaries set and I can still focus on it. Because we have these technologies in our everyday life, right? You drive a car, you have lane keep assist, you have backup cameras that automatically hit your brakes before you hit something. So these technologies exist in everyday life, but not in surgery. So that's kind of the parallel that we are drawing and trying to bring those safety enhancing features in order to reduce the cognitive fatigue of the surgeon and allowing the surgeon to focus on the critical task.
Well, I'm really glad that you reiterated the point of cognitive fatigue. So one of the common themes that I've been learning over my time with AI Meets Life Sci is how AI as in artificial intelligence and AI as in augmented intelligence, are both supporting workflow, workload, but I've never heard cognitive fatigue as being one of those pillars. And it makes so much sense, especially when you're talking about how you're identifying the anatomy and you're putting these kind of safe zones in for peace of mind. I mean, that has to alleviate some of this cognitive fatigue that you don't think about. And that's really exciting. That's really, really exciting. So, two things that I've already gotten out of our conversation, Anthony, is how more approachable artificial slash augmented intelligence can be when you think about it as augmented and not replacing anything, just adding to, complementing. And then the, as I would call it, the intangible effect, which of cognitive fatigue and reducing that and helping, and this is a phrase I use all the time now, helping humans be more human. So helping surgeons be better at being a surgeon and eliminating more of the areas that would impact the focus or impact the end result. It's really encouraging. So last question for you, Anthony, and this goes in line with the surgeon as well. With this very, again, exciting augmented intelligence, your enhanced surgical robotic systems, how that can really support the surgeons moving forward in a way that we've never seen before. How do you envision the role of the surgeon evolving? Let's call it in the next 5 years, because especially with the rate of how artificial and augmented intelligence is moving forward, we don't know what the future is. It could be tomorrow. So maybe what could the role of the surgeon look like in 5-10 years? Any thoughts?
Yeah, great question, Karen. We believe that the surgeons, this technology will help level the field of surgical knowledge and skill, because surgeons get trained in different places, in different countries, different geographies, different settings. Some get extended amount of training, some don't, and so it's very there's a lot of variability in how surgeons get trained. So irrelevant of that training, this technology has the power to normalize that by providing this digital assistance, so that surgeons can continue to perform at a much higher level in a predictable fashion. So it's really a move that will over time will drive to a certain level of standardization of surgery. When you know how to do something really, really well, and know what that you can, yes, there are variables because we are humans and we have small, slight differences anatomically, but when you know what good looks like, it will lead to a certain level of standardization, and now that will make the surgeon more effective and offer the surgeon a higher level of confidence. And also the surgeon will be productive and be able to have a better balance, work and life balance, because surgeon burnout is something that is increasing. And with these tools that will help address some of these cognitive fatigue, I think it will be a welcome change for the surgeons to have the peace of mind and be able to say, okay, I think I've done this case extremely well, and I can leave for the day and feel good about the outcome that's going to be delivered to the patients, of all the patients who had surgery during the day.
Well, hear. Anthony, Fernando, thank you very much for joining us on AI Meets LifeSci. I feel lighter than I have in a while. This has been such a positive and encouraging conversation. Best of luck, and thank you for what you're doing for the medical device industry, for patients at large. We really appreciate, again, what you and your team is doing, and I appreciate your time. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Kellen. Really glad to be here.
It's always really nice to have the opportunity to listen back to the interviews. And one of Anthony's quotes struck me in particular. Anthony says, augmented intelligence is really about how we can augment the surgeon so that the surgeon can perform at the highest possible level. Okay, so as much as I loved that episode, I'm really excited for you to hear the episode with my colleague Brian Bunce, where he sits down with Tahsin Syed, GM of Health AI at Amazon Web Services. Take it away, Brian.
Hello, I'm Brian Bunce. I'm here with Tahsin Syed from AWS, and I'll be asking some questions about the healthcare business. And just to get started to hear about your role as GM Health AI, AWS, AI/ML at AS, was curious if you can give a bit of a backstory on what got you interested in the intersection of healthcare, life sciences, and AI.
Sure. Yeah. It's great to be on with you, Brian, and thanks for having me. Let's see. So first, maybe a little bit about my role as GM of Health AI at AWS. So the teams that I have build, deploy, and operate our purpose-built services for healthcare and life sciences. So we're responsible for the product, the engineering, and the business aspects for those services. And our mission is kind of the same as the AWS. If you've heard the AWS tagline of remove undifferentiated heavy lifting, what we do and what our purpose is, what our mission is to remove the domain-specific undifferentiated heavy lifting that a lot of healthcare and life sciences customers have to deal with when using kind of technology to run their business, right? And what I mean by that are things, simple things like maybe the undifferentiated heavy lifting that's involved in storing lots of health data, right? So things like compression and lifecycle management, or in for EHR data, things like operating FHIR APIs at scale. FHIR is the kind of an interoperability standard, the fast healthcare interoperability resources. So, operating those APIs at scale, or perhaps doing zero ETL transformations of that EHR data into analytics-ready formats, right? So things like that. You can, running secondary analysis of genomic sequences, or doing protein structure prediction at scale. How do you do these things, and how do you manage the infrastructure and provision it and run it efficiently? Those are kind of the areas that we as a team within AWS tackle for our customers. So that's kind of what we do at AWS. And then from my perspective, why I've been interested in this is, my whole career has been spent in health technology. Prior to AWS, I was at a company called Cerner for almost over 23 years. And there, I worked in various kind of capacities within the electronic health record arena, including in many different disciplines across, critical care, population health, et cetera. And I've always, in that whole time, seen how how the healthcare industry has maybe not been able to harness all of the power of technology to really make the improvements that other industries have. And that's and it's such an important area, taking care of patients and ensuring that the health of populations is trending better than it used to be, is something that I really believe in. And I think that we can really make a big difference in through the application of technology. So that's why I've spent my whole career in this area.
Well, the point that you raised about the undifferentiated heavy lifting, I'm wondering, I imagine that's really important because you have this huge demand for talent in areas like data science and AI, like, even within the tech space as a whole, there's like a lot of competition. So it's difficult for healthcare companies, for drug developers, for hospitals to get access to some of the best talent. Given that backdrop, I imagine that ability to kind of remove some of the complexity from a technological perspective can really help organizations to make more progress and mature on the digital spectrum. Like, could you talk more about how AWS works with companies to kind of take away some more of the heavy lifting, as you alluded to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we we're always looking and working backwards from our customers' needs, right? And it's exactly as you said. Customers who want to apply machine learning or AI to healthcare data and healthcare use cases don't always necessarily have the expertise needed to develop those things from scratch, right? So we look at what are kind of the foundational capabilities that we can provide that really makes it easy for customers to apply those kinds of technologies and techniques to their business, to their needs, but without having to develop everything from the ground up. So some examples of that are things like, our natural language processing capabilities, right? So we have services like Comprehend Medical that help customers extract meaning from unstructured clinical notes or other kinds of documents within the healthcare and life sciences arena, right? So how do you take a document and you process it and get kind of medications, test treatment procedures, diagnoses, and link those to actual, like the ontologies like ICD-10 or RxNorm, and then make downstream decisions based on that data. That could be, it can take away a lot of manual effort that these customers are putting in, and a lot of time that experts are putting in to try to read these documents and extract these insights. How do we make that faster, easier, and scalable? How do you process hundreds or thousands or millions of documents in an easy way versus deploying kind of humans to read that or building your own systems to do that? So we work with customers to identify what those kinds of problems are that they are tackling, and then finding, what is the right technology to help them enable that. So some are like these AI services I talked about, like Comprehend Medical. There's services like Health Scribe, AWS Health Scribe, which is taking a patient-physician audio consultation, transcribing it, and then automatically generating a clinical note from it. So that really reduces a clinician's burden on, where they can spend more time with the patient, actually just talking to them, understanding that person's issues, and providing a real, diagnosis and treatment, and then not having to worry about, I have to document all this so it can be, so it can be billed correctly, so that I have it for the next time that I'm seeing this person. All of that is kind of taken care of by this capability, right? So you take away all of that kind of burdensome, undifferentiated work that the clinician is doing. So those are the AI services. In other areas, though, like research and R&D and other things, that, if you look at what's happened with generative AI and kind of the explosion of that technology over the last 18 months, AWS is also looking at how do we make it easy for our customers to really take advantage of this really powerful set of capabilities that's evolved, but without having to kind of worry about all of the pieces that you need to build and develop on your own if you're going to deploy this, right? So some of that is about security and privacy, like all the framework, the groundwork, right, that you need. How can you ensure you can use a foundation model in a secure and private way? And then other pieces of that are, how do you have access? How do you give your folks access to the best foundation models or a variety of them? And how do you do that without deploying your own huge IT and engineering, software engineering capability, right? So there we have services like AWS Bedrock that are providing customers with the ability to choose between, the latest leading foundation models from folks like Cohere and Anthropic and Stability, and kind of making the ability to access those models just a simple API call, and you can do it in a very secure way, right? You can, it's all within your own network, your own VPC. The data is never going anywhere else. You can, with peace of mind, use those services. So we kind of operate at many different layers of, let's say, the stack, and say, what is the right tool for the capability or the sophistication that a customer has, and what can they use? So those are just some examples of those.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Gen AI, and on that point, I think it was research from almost a year ago. Well, I guess it was a year ago. It was April 2023 from Capgemini, but I raise it only because they had this factoid about percentage of organizations who agree with the statement that Gen AI is a topic of discussion at the board level. And in pharma/healthcare, it was 98%. It was close to that kind of across sectors. In high tech, it was 100%. But anyway, I raise that because in pharma/healthcare, if you dig down, it's a lot of companies are taking still a wait and see approach. I think it was 40% just about were doing that, as opposed to like 58% considered themselves to be strong kind of advocates of Gen AI. So given that kind of backdrop, and I'm sure those numbers have changed over the past year, but I'm curious what your perspective is for organizations that are a bit kind of like fresher earlier on in their Gen AI. They're curious about it, they're talking about it at the board level. What is your advice for kind of like the first steps and like the data prep strategy that they should kind of get in place to proceed with a more mature kind of strategy with Gen AI?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's super interesting to see how all of our customers are approaching this, and I think Gen AI is on, and I talk to many healthcare life sciences customers, and it's definitely first and foremost on almost all of their minds, right? Mm-hmm. Whether they're taking a wait and see approach or whether they're diving in, it's definitely an area that everybody wants to understand, what should they be doing and how should they be proceeding. So I think the first thing I want to do is acknowledge that mature Gen AI deployments are still pretty rare across all industries, not just healthcare and life sciences, right? It's the technology has been moving extremely fast, and maybe on a daily or weekly basis, there's like huge advancements and big changes, and there's new models, there's new techniques, there's new ways to apply them. So that creates a really difficult, I think, landscape for how to get to a day-to-day production use of it. You can certainly do a lot of things, but how do you get from that to, hey, I'm going to put it in the hand of users, and they're going to do some daily task with it or some set of daily tasks with it, right? So I think for those folks that are just getting started, I would say, you have to be clear about the goal that you have in mind. Is it for, one way to look at it is that, hey, we want to experiment to determine how our business could be fundamentally transformed by these capabilities. So examples like that could be a pharma company might want to look at how could we shorten the drug discovery cycle, with this capability. But then there could be other ways, like you could be looking at, something much more constrained and more immediately possible. Like, could I respond to an RFP using generative AI capabilities, or could I provide access to my internal knowledge base using generative AI capabilities to all my employees, right? So you have to kind of make sure you understand the goal, and then look at the framework that you would apply based on that goal. If you're doing experimentation, you have a different kind of way to look at this. You can tolerate a lot more ambiguity. You can tolerate a lot more like, okay, I think this will be solved in the future, but it's not solved yet. Those could be things like, there's lots of hallucinations. There's, RAG isn't working correctly, and you don't have the right embedding model. Whatever, right? But then if you want to do something that's much more immediate, then you have to look at how do I constrain the system to be able to actually produce something useful for a user without these problems. Like, users are not going to tolerate maybe having a lot of hallucinations or mistakes. They can tolerate some, but certainly not a lot. So what guardrails do you have to put in place? So once you have that goal and those constraints in mind, then you have to look at, okay, like, how do I mitigate the either the issues I've identified, or how do I enable this experimentation? So once you have that goal and you can look at those guardrails, then I think you have to decide, okay, what's good enough, right? Like, if you're waiting for perfection, I think that is probably not where we are. In most cases. So you have to make a determination of what's good enough. And good enough could be, you're always going to require, if you're automating something, you're always going to require a human review before, you do whatever is downstream to the automation. Or it could be that, you have the right kind of warnings or training for your users of here's how to identify, that the output that you're getting is acceptable or something like that, right? And so I think that is two ways to get started. But you have to really have, I think the fundamental thing is you have to set your expectations up front, and then really proceed with identifying kind of what are the parameters that would make you successful in achieving that goal. And then, of course, identify the right tools that can get you there, right? So that I talked about, kind of AWS has a lot of offerings. So you've got to make a build versus buy decision. I think many, most, I don't know what, I won't ascribe a percentage, but I would say north of 90% of enterprises are not going to go and build their own foundation models and things like that. They're going to go out and look for, okay, how do I get access to state-of-the-art foundation models in a cost-effective way? So then you can look at things like Bedrock, things like Amazon Q. So Bedrock might be more, hey, I have direct access to a model and I want to interact with it. I want to do, kind of retriever-based knowledge bases. I want to do agent-based things, but I want to do some building myself. Or you could look at other higher tier services, for example, like Amazon Q, which is much more from an AWS offering perspective. You just say, here's a knowledge base that you can point to, and then users can interact with the system in a chat-like way, and then the Q service takes care of a lot of the underlying kind of, dealing with processing, indexing, giving you back the good responses kind of thing. So then you can identify those tools, and then you can kind of decide, yes, I can deploy this or not deploy this.
You mentioned how fast the technology is moving, and it's also hard to keep track of all the potential applications you could use Gen AI for. And given that kind of the fast-moving technology and like the broad base of applications, what is your sense of which areas might have the most impact in healthcare? Like I can imagine, like one thing I've not heard about a lot in like the drug discovery space is making better bets on certain clinical areas. Like we've seen like a couple of companies that have made like bets on the metabolic space have seen like a huge uptick in valuation. But I imagine that Gen AI and like ML and like the ability to predict kind of like demographic dynamics could be an interesting area for AWS in the coming years. Can you kind of speak to what is your sense of what are the more high impact areas for the technology?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it's going to take within healthcare and life sciences, I would differentiate in two ways. One is I think there's a lot of high impact areas immediately, right? And I think we need to look at what's possible immediately, and that's going to be probably not in maybe the core business areas. So there's some things in drug discovery, and we can get to that. But it could be much more in, hey, how do I automate, submissions to the FDA, right? And how do I look at processing patient-reported outcomes at scale? Those kinds of things I think are much more possible right away, and can reduce a lot of friction within these organizations. Like, so it could change the drug discovery cycle right now, but just based on reducing a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork and making it much simpler for just the humans within those organizations that are doing these tasks, make it faster for them. So I think there's ways to be impactful right away if you apply it narrowly and with the right safeguards. So kind of what I was talking about before. And then in the longer term, like you're saying, I do think we all know the cycle to bring a successful drug to market is in the decade range, in the in the $1 billion spend range, lots of failures on the way. So the question really is, how do you identify and discard the those failures that you were going to have? Can you fail much faster, right? Could you look at these technologies and do the protein structure prediction, do the diffusion, do kind of the antibody predictions, do all of these things in a much faster experimentation cycle? And I think that will have huge impact from a life sciences discovery perspective. So that's one. I think other areas, though, like even in the application, like personalization and of the therapies, there's a lot of potential application here, right? If you're looking at how do you bring in different modalities of data, like a lot of these models are starting to be very good from a multimodal perspective. So can we envision in the future much better kind of identification of the patient and the therapy, right, match? So if you have the input parameters of your omics data, imaging data, EHR data, like today, if you think about a lot of oncology treatments, you're going to go through the first line protocol often before you do the further kind of, okay, I'm going to do the tumor section, then I'm going to understand like it didn't respond to the treatment, and then I'm going to identify the much more targeted therapy. But could it be possible that everybody's therapy is personalized? I think that's also an area that these technologies are going to have huge applicability in the future.
Could you give an example or two of how AWS's AI services like SageMaker or AWS for Health are being used by either pharma or medtech companies now?
Yeah, sure. So maybe the first one I can talk about is we've been working with a lot of pharma and biotech companies, and maybe for example, we've been working with Merck, who is through HPC and HPC on AWS, so high performance computing on AWS and AWS Health Omics, are kind of scaling protein structure prediction within their organization. So manage workflows to run AlphaFold or ESM Fold for their drug discovery, and then also be able to do molecular dynamics calculations, right? So doing that through our managed services has really improved kind of the speed at which they can perform like experiments within the organization. And what it's also done is freed up kind of scientists from having to deal with these like infrastructure or software engineering IT problems, right? They can just be confident that that's all going to work and scale and don't have to spend their time on those considerations. They can just spend much more time on the science and get much more, immediate results and be able to turn those around and experiment with them. And then other examples are we've been working with Pfizer, and Pfizer is already kind of applying generative AI in multiple ways. So specifically for identifying new oncology targets. So today, it's a manual process to aggregate information across a lot of different data sources, and then a human has to kind of collate them and then look at the different scientific content, the scientific studies, and make decisions based on okay, here's where we want to focus and here's where we want to do our experiments. They can do that now in a much smaller fraction of time by using generative AI models to do that work for them, to sift through that data, to draw kind of their conclusions and work with the scientists in a natural language interface to kind of get to that candidate identification much faster, or the pathway much faster. At the same time, Pfizer has also developed an internal platform that they're calling Vox that's deployed on some of the best language models that Bedrock is giving them access to. And that is really much more to do, to enable employees within Pfizer to be much more productive, like doing things like creating first drafts of patent applications or generating other medical and scientific content. So Pfizer's been doing that work with us, and they expect to over the next few years identify use cases that will end up saving them over $750 million to $1 billion annually in costs is what they're estimating. So that's been that's been a lot of work that we've done. And then the last one I'll mention is we're also working with Amgen. And Amgen has been using generative AI solutions from Bedrock and SageMaker jumpstart to, again, provide assistance to their scientists, researchers, and engineers, as well as looking at how to accelerate drug discovery within their organization.
I guess a quick but kind of big question to follow up is, it seems like, as we talked about in the beginning of the call, like companies like AWS are helping to make the infrastructure easier to use for scientists and for the life science companies. I'm curious if you could say more on kind of the role that you see AWS playing in kind of streamlining infrastructure, because I guess where I'm going in part is because I'm imagining like the high performance computing example that you gave. I've heard anecdotes about how you could free up scientists that you mentioned and radically accelerate sometimes like experiments. Like I've heard anecdotes from like going from like months to days in some cases. But could you talk a bit more about kind of like how you can kind of get to those kind of hard to imagine gains where you're like accelerating vastly like experiments or clinical trial protocols, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe one concrete example of this is the work that scientists are doing. They have to kind of look at, okay, I want to do this particular protein structure prediction, and then I have to analyze those results. And then I have to make a decision of, was this successful or not? And then I go back and say, okay, it wasn't. So now I'm going to do the next thing. And then, there's kind of a loop there, right? Like, and the human is in that loop. But one of the things these technologies can do is assess many at once, right? So the idea is that you can do, if you could previously do one experiment every few days with the whole loop, maybe now you can do 1,000 of them in that same time frame, because the technology that we're talking about is able to first, like just the blocking and tackling, it's the managed capabilities that are able to scale seamlessly and say, yeah, I can run 1,000 of these versus one of these at a time, and I can do it without the customer or the scientist having to run each job and then look at the results of each job and so on. I can run the 1,000 jobs at once, and so that's just basic stuff. But then, but it's important. It's basic, but it significantly speeds up the workflow that these folks have. But then also, how can you apply generative AI technologies to help assess the outcomes of that, right? And that, I think, is if you can summarize and point scientists to the right areas, like these models can say, okay, this was viable, this wasn't viable, based on criteria that are built into the models themselves, then it makes that assessment much faster as well. So that is part of the reason we think that these things have been much, can be sped up a lot. And we're starting to see that. Like it's not a panacea, and it's not happening at scale across the board yet, but certainly there's pockets in which those improvements are being seen. So that's part of why we believe in what we're seeing in our customers can really improve the speed at which these experimentations are done.
It's not a panacea, but it's also exciting to hear about some of these anecdotes of companies that are cutting certain processes in half. Like I've heard about that happening in the clinical trial space. And it seems like that's an area, you kind of alluded to this before a couple of times, but it seems like a big area for Gen AI to help accelerate things. Could you speak a bit more on what you're seeing in the clinical trial space with Gen AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a few things here in clinical trials. One of the things that I think is key is how do we identify, how do we do better protocol design? How do we identify, better ways to recruit patients and retain patients in the trials? That's really important, right? So traditionally, these were very manual designs, and you have to it's very hit and miss, right? You've got to go broad and try to recruit lots and lots of folks, and then hope that you have enough people for your study and that they're going to stick around throughout the study. So what we can do here is there's a wealth of information out there already from previous studies, from clinical systems that have a lot of information about patients, right? So these systems, the AI systems we're talking about, can learn from that information and really say, okay, if, looking at your previous 500 studies that were similar to this idea, these are the kinds of patients that you should recruit, and these are the kinds of patients that might stay, have a higher probability of being retained throughout the study. So the idea here is that if you can really make those decisions more efficiently and make those predictions, then you have much more successful and much more efficient studies, because you may have identified a way to, increase the retention rate by 10% or 15%. And that's a big difference to a study, right? And to the successful conclusion of the study. So those are areas that we think are going to be very important. And so some specific things that we've done, for example, we worked with Fred Hutch, who used Comprehend Medical to help identify patients for clinical trials that could benefit from specific cancer therapies. And the way that was done is they applied the NLP capability to look across millions of clinical notes, extract and index the conditions, medications, the choice of therapeutic options, and then instead of manually processing each document that documents probably take a human tens of minutes to process, the NLP capability is processing it in seconds and is processing millions of those in a batch, right? So suddenly you can reduce that time and you can really use all of that information then to make the predictions. So that's something they saw success with. I also think we can start applying newer capabilities here. So AWS at reInvent announced this. If you've heard of AWS Clean Rooms, that was announced earlier the year before at reInvent, but at reInvent this year, we announced in preview this Clean Rooms ML capability. And the idea there is that participants who don't necessarily want to share data can put their data in a clean room, and they can run inference or analysis on that data without sharing the underlying data, right? So in this case, you can think about applications like a health system and then a pharmaceutical. And the pharma company or the biotech company may have identified a way to say, hey, these are the kinds of patients I want to recruit. But the patients are all in kind of the hospital system or somewhere else, right? So if they both put their data in clean rooms and you run this ML algorithm that says, okay, I see, you want patients like these, then the health system, without sharing that patient data, which is a big barrier, right? Like in terms of sharing private data to identify these things, they can do it without sharing the underlying data, and they can say, okay, I have, patients that match this criteria. Maybe then we can approach them, get consent, see if they want to opt into this trial or not. But really improve, reduce the friction there too that exists in terms of trying to get all of the frameworks in place to share data and then have somebody else analyze that data. We really take that away and just say, hey, you can just run this in a way that there is no access to the discrete data that's owned by either party, but you get the result that you want, which is you can identify patients much faster that might be suited for the trial.
Well, it seems like that technology too has interesting applications potentially for clinical care, where if a doctor has a patient that's in a narrow demographic that wasn't in a clinical trial, they could then go out and see if there were records out there of patients that were similar to that, and they could get a sense of how well a drug did in that patient population. So it seems like an interesting kind of possibility there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was just it was just announced, and it has applications across multiple industries. But we believe there's going to be a lot of application in kind of these use cases in healthcare and life sciences.
So maybe a final question, and you can pick a time frame. But I think I had jotted down 5 years plus. That's impossible to predict. But given this technology, Gen AI, and kind of all the different domains of AI and machine learning are evolving so fast, it's hard to say definitively. But what is your sense of kind of where things are headed with AI and healthcare and / life sciences in the coming months and years?
Yeah,
it's a big question.
No, it's a question that we think about all the time, because it's important to kind of the AWS way is to look around corners and understand where are we going and what can we build for our customers that will help them, get to that future state. So, I have a few ideas here. One is clearly it's about I think precision and personalized medicine. So this kind of, if you've seen our investments from an AWS perspective, we're really investing specifically in optimizing each modality of healthcare data. So things like medical imaging, omics, genomics and multiomics, electronic health, clinical, structured and unstructured health data. How do you store, query, analyze each of them optimally? But then I think the real power is going to be in how do you bring together those data sets to be able to do personalized medicine at scale, right? And I think what one of the things that I see for the next 5 years, 10 years is this ability to really seamlessly use kind of cell-based imaging data like digital path data and your clinical health data, and like look at tumor progression, just have machine learning or AI be looking at, okay, like how are you responding to a therapy? No, we should recommend a different therapy because this one is not responsive, but making much faster decisions than what's possible today, right? Because you're looking at all of the data that is all of the longitudinal data for a patient and really making recommendations based on that and processing it and doing that. So I think I see a lot more of those. And one of the, maybe I was looking before this interview, one of the stats that I think helps bear this out is if you've looked at the FDA medical device AI algorithm approvals in the US, there's about, I think as of end of last year, there's 700 algorithms that have been approved. But to me, what was interesting is the first algorithm was approved in 1995. It was for kind of cervical cancer, like it was called PapNet, and so how to interpret kind of Pap smear data and make predictions based on that. From 1995 to 2017, less than 100 were approved. Since 2017, so 2018 onwards, the rest of the 600 have been approved. So, and those are all primarily radiology and image processing, like 80% of them. But I think clearly there is a huge kind of step function here, like an acceleration in the application of these technologies to healthcare and life sciences, right? And so I think we will see a continuation of that, and we will see, obviously the precision personalized medicine, but also a lot more algorithms around, let's say, predicting the health of an individual, right? And early interventions, like can you look at this data and can you develop systems that say, hey, if you took these actions now, then you would change your risk profile in this way, but specific to you, right? We see that all the time. You get lots of advice on how to eat or how to exercise or things like that. But the thing about that is it's mostly generic advice, right? Based on really big studies, but it's not personalized advice. So how can that change? How can it say for you, based on your genetic and environmental factors, this is what you should do? So I think we'll see some of that as well. And then I think we'll see an acceleration in R&D. So we've talked about this today, but I think we will see, we've seen new antibiotics being proposed and created by the application of AI systems. That's incredibly exciting. Like the antibiotic resistance is a huge issue, right? And so to be able to create a novel antibiotic is amazing. And if that is being driven by AI, then I think that you'll see a lot more from a vaccine perspective, from a therapy perspective, being driven by kind of these AI systems. And obviously the humans are going to have to interpret that and get to conclusions, but I expect that it'll be accelerated, and maybe in 5 to 10 years, maybe we can bring drugs to market in 3 to 4 years instead of 10 to 12 years, right? Or maybe it's 1 to 2 years. Like the Moderna vaccine, obviously those are extraordinary conditions, but that came to life much, much faster. So could we get to a 12-month cycle? That would be amazing. So I think across the board, those are all things that are really important. But I think to get there, though, there's a lot of problems we have to solve still, right? And I think in these technologies, generative AI or AI in general, we've got to focus more on the transparency of these systems, ensure that they are correct from an equity perspective, right? So that they're not biased or toxic in ways that standard evaluation frameworks are out there. You see lots of things for medical foundation models around passing, the USMLE and things like that. But is that really the right evaluation framework? It's unclear. Probably not. So what's a better one? Like, how do we actually talk about this in the public? Like in a public way of how do you benchmark these things for the tasks that they're doing? And then finally, I think we'll see a lot more regulatory frameworks that actually can help guide these capabilities, because I talked about the FDA approvals, but I think there's a lot that will still need to happen to apply these technologies safely.
Well, I think we'll have to leave it there, but I really enjoyed hearing your perspective kind of across the AI landscape as it pertains to healthcare. So once again, thanks for your time. Great interview, and look forward to staying in touch.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. It was great talking to you as well.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for spending your time listening to DeviceTalks AI. I really hope that these medtech conversations have helped inspire and inform. I mean, that's really ultimately our goal. My name is Kayleen Brown. I'm the managing editor for DeviceTalks, and please, as a favor, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me Kayleen Brown, just like the color, on LinkedIn. And please send me a message. Tell me your medtech story. I mean, we're always looking for innovative advancements and stories that help our device makers build better devices. Once again, thank you for supporting DeviceTalks. If you haven't already, please subscribe to DeviceTalks on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube, and check out DeviceTalks.com so you can see our DeviceTalks Spotlight, our DeviceTalks Tuesdays webinars, and learn more about the upcoming conference this October, DeviceTalks West. That's at west.devicetalks.com. We'll see you next time, and thanks again.